For our last discussion, we are super pumped to welcome two true champions. Two fighters who have been with us since the beginning, have been there every time we've needed them. Their staffs are unbelievable. We are saying farewell, hopefully temporarily, to one of them, but this is a true treat. Congressman Mike Flood and Congressman Wiley Nickel, Mr. Flood from Nebraska and Mr. Nickel from North Carolina, are the absolute pinnacle example of bipartisanship done in a collegial, friendly way that looks to move the ball to help consumers and to help industry, and it has been a joy to watch them work together. With Senator Lummis, they introduced the bipartisan resolution to repeal SAB 121, the Bipartisan Equal Opportunity for All Investors Act. They have been at every hearing saying all of the right things and talking about the transformative power of this industry. There are a lot of new members of Congress getting on the crypto train, but these two have, as I said, been there from the beginning, and they are stalwart defenders of ours. Congressman Nickel did so even in the face of a very tactful and engaging and sometimes intimidating top Democrat, Maxine Waters, on his committee, but they got along, they respect each other, and Mr. Nickel went his own way, and he did so for our industry many times, even on the biggest votes. Their staffs, Kurt and Jacob, are the best. They are always there picking up on the first or second ring when we need them. They're at all of our events, and they too, like their bosses, are champions of ours. So please, welcome to the stage Congressman Flood and Congressman Nickel with Nilmini Rubin from Hedera. Congressman Flood, Congressman Nickel, please join us.
Is this working? Good. Thank you, Congressman Flood, and thank you, Congressman Nickel, for joining us today. We are delighted to have you. We wanted to ask you about your work in digital assets at all. What got you interested in our sector, and what do you think are the most interesting use cases?
Well, so, does this work? There we go. I'm in broadcasting, can you tell? So I, born and raised in Nebraska, I was in the Nebraska unicameral legislature for 10 years. I was watching Wyoming, and out of a regulatory sandbox, they allowed state-chartered banks in Wyoming to take custody of digital assets. And it was kind of the Wild West when Wyoming did it. And I thought to myself, how are we going to keep these bright minds in our good education system? How are we going to provide opportunities for young people that want to work in financial services, given our big footprint? Obviously, Warren Buffett, we've got 110 insurance companies domiciled in Nebraska. We have a big financial services sector. And so as a member of the legislature in 2021, I introduced the Nebraska Financial Innovation Act, and it essentially made Nebraska the second state in the nation to allow state-chartered banks to custody digital assets. And the first thing I did is I learned all of the opposition that existed out there from the Nebraska bankers, the American Bankers Association, mostly because it was new and it was dangerous. That's what they said. And to be honest, when you look at FTX and some of the problems that we've seen, there is a case to be made for good players in the space to run towards quality regulators. And so I passed that, and I really just fell in love with the material. And the more I learned, the less I knew. And when you hit a project like that that's evergreen in the law, it's really exciting to push it. So when I came to Congress, I asked to be on the Financial Services Committee. It's the only committee that I sit on, and I've gotten to work with Wiley Nickel and so many other bright folks. And this really isn't a partisan issue. Currency is not partisan. The American dollar and its power around the world is not partisan. It's part of being an American. And that's how I got into it, and I love it.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here with everybody. This was a really exciting issue in this Congress. So for me, I won one of just 6 Republican seats that flipped from red to blue in the last election, so represented a very purple district in North Carolina, and wanted to do things in a bipartisan way And so for me, we had Patrick McHenry from North Carolina also, who's the Republican chair currently of the Financial Services Committee. So I thought that was really a great lane to do some bipartisan work. And so I got on the House Financial Services Committee. It's my only committee as well, like Congressman Flood, and started challenging the sort of assumptions. When I first got here, it was, FTX was very fresh in people's minds, and on the Democratic side, there was this opposition, and it just didn't make sense to me. Because the bill the work we did was about protecting consumers, keeping digital innovation here in the U.S. And those and the more and more you get into it, you just see some folks in my party who were just out of step on this issue. So it was a real great lane to do bipartisan work, and really excited about what we've been able to accomplish, because there's so many great use cases, and I could go on and on about this stuff, but one that I was just reading about was the California DMV is putting all, titles on the blockchain. That's amazing, for, a non-financial use of it, but that's really exciting. And those are the kind of things we need to be encouraging here in Washington.
So both of you have talked about nonpartisanship and bipartisanship, and we're in a town where that's really hard. Could you tell us a little bit about how you cultivated bipartisanship in your work on House Financial Services, and what lessons learned you might have for us?
Well, I'll start maybe. Here's what I would say. The challenge is Republicans versus Democrats. Of course, that underlays everything. The challenge on the right and the left are that we have different generational leaders. And oftentimes I find myself sitting down with a member of more mature age on the Republican side and talking about why we have to look at digital assets. What is the blockchain? And it's education as much as it is advocacy, because they want to understand it. And to be honest, when I started learning about it, it takes a while, because I've grown up, I'm 49 years old, and fiat currency is all I've ever known. And so imagine you're 71 years old and you represent a district in Pennsylvania. This isn't a partisan issue. They're trying to understand it, and what you can do to help us is reach out to your member of Congress that may not be on financial services and tell them, hey, this is an opportunity for Americans to create wealth. It's an opportunity for us to keep our young people in rural states. But Wiley, Congressman Nickel, you were right when the Blockchain Association says he had a tougher role. I had French Hill and Patrick McHenry as my leaders on the Financial Services Committee, and they were already running towards innovation and doing good things. On the other side of the aisle, much different situation, and so he took a lot harder votes than I did, but he didn't just take the votes. When we had this thing on the floor, he was out going person to person to person on the Democratic side, and at one point for Patrick McHenry's signature bill, Fit for the 21st Century, we got 71 Democrat votes, including Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, which I think was huge, in large part because of his advocacy.
And I think I also want to credit the Blockchain Association and so many groups. I mean, change doesn't happen in Washington, in the halls of Congress. It happens when people make their voice heard. And so, the Blockchain Association, among many other groups, was really a big part of that in moving bipartisan legislation. But no, I was excited to do that. Certainly not all Democrats shared my view, but the more and more we educated folks, the better we did, especially with that generational kind of issue. The younger members were a lot more receptive. We did these presentations and these policy meetings over and over with Democrats to try to make the case for why this financial inclusion piece is so important for kind of our values. But the one point I just want to leave folks with when you're talking about bipartisanship, we're looking at, obviously Republicans in control of the House, Senate, and White House. If you want legislation to stay out in that bipartisan category, you got to keep it that way. And my hope is for this next Congress, we're going to continue with French Hill in charge of the House Financial Services Committee along those same lines, getting Democrats on board, doing legislation in a bipartisan way, because it'll stay. If it's all one side, if it's all Republicans and no Democrats on board, as soon as Democrats are in charge, it's going to just flip back and forth. So the one point I just want to underscore is if you care about good public policy in Washington, you really want to do it in a bipartisan way.
Absolutely. This is a room full of people that will actually think that the SEC Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 is interesting. So I wanted to ask you, tell us about your work on that and all of the effort you did to deal with SAB 121.
Well, when the CBO said that this was a CRA, Congressional Review Authority Act, eligible rule for purposes of being repealed by the Congress, it was a game changer. And I really credit my staff member, Kurt Bliamtis, who is just whip smart and does a great job. He comes to me and he says, we've got something here. SAB 121 has overstepped, and we can file a Congressional Review Act on it. And we, of course, were talking already with Congressman Nichols' office. And it was, at the time that all happened, I thought, what are the chances that we can get this passed in the Senate? And so we worked very closely in the House. We got it across the finish line. And then when he got 60 votes in the Senate and Chuck Schumer voted for it, I thought, wow, think of that. The Senate Majority Leader bucking his own president's SEC, and we sent that over to the White House, and I think they were stunned. The White House intervened at the last second when we had it on the floor in the House, and they throw up all sorts of issues. BNY Mellon was in the mix with all that stuff. Suddenly, BNY Mellon was being offered all of these exit strategies where they could actually custody digital assets, and it told me that this had gotten real really fast for the executive branch. And I hated the idea that we'd carve out something for just one bank in America and we'd have this kind of shattered policy. I said, it reminds me of like 3 county commissioners trying to figure out which roads to gravel. I mean, that's the kind of amateur hour that we saw from the SEC at that point. And I think the fact that it passed in the Senate was a huge, you should have seen Majority Leader Scalise. When he saw that happened over in the Senate, it was like, wow, this is a real issue. And I think it put digital assets up here in terms of priority.
I think the vote we had, it was really the first vote we did in Congress was SAB 121. That sort of set the table for me with Democrats on FIT 21, the digital assets market structure bill. Getting Schumer on board was important, and I certainly was one of the Democrats in a less comfortable position going against, my own, our own White House. It's rare to be an original a lead on the Democratic side against your own administration, but it's an important point, an important issue, and was glad to get it a lot more attention on the House side. But I think too, just to for folks who care about SAB 121, I think this is probably one of the lower hanging pieces of fruit for the next SEC. Hopefully, it goes away real quick, and we can move on to bigger and better things.
Thank you. So in a testament to your bipartisanship, you both went on a CODEL to Singapore, Japan, and the United Arab Emirates. And I'm really curious about what you learned there, since all of those jurisdictions have developed their financial regulations on digital assets much more than we have. What did you learn there, and do you think that the United States can catch up?
I'll just talk about Singapore. They're a city-state nation that operates, very differently than we do. We met with all of those folks. They were very proud of their regulatory regime, and we listened to them for the better part of an hour. And then at the end, I asked them a question. And I said, well, do you feel like you're ahead and you don't want to see the United States get into this? Thinking that they had just made this case as to everything they'd done. And the lady's answer, and she was in charge of the entire process there in Singapore, she said the only way this industry works is if the United States is engaged. And I thought that was quite an admission from the head of the regulatory effort on the digital asset side for Singapore that unless the United States comes into the mix, this is not going to work. And for me, it was like, yes, we need to assume the leadership role in digital assets. The United Arab Emirates, I was just shocked. Their sovereign growth funds are unbelievably powerful and strong, and they are doubling down on America. They are decoupling from China, and they are wanting to do everything in the United States, and they're asking us, when are you going to set this up? And so I left that trip thinking, we are the most important country in the world when it comes to the financial system, and the world's reserve currency is and should be the US dollar. I get more excited about stablecoins than I do any other kind of Bitcoin or commodity. And this is what the countries that we visited want. I don't know.
No, I agree 1,000%. You know, we're fighting for the future of the digital dollar here, making sure we're the global reserve currency. And the takeaway, you know, certainly number one was that, you know, the rest of the world needs the U.S. to act. We need to keep digital innovation here in the United States. But all these other you know, very mature crypto markets that we visited were open for business. They want businesses to come, you know, and at the same time we were doing that, we just had, you know, the please get out of the country message from the SEC. So, you know, it was a stark difference there. I'm really excited. I'm very optimistic about, you know, what this next SEC is going to do here. So I think we're going to see some very good decisions coming out of the next few months here too.
I hope you're right. So, Representative Flood, tell us about Flyover FinTech.
Oh, yes. So in line with the Nebraska Financial Innovation Act, which is now law, and we have bank charters that are going through the review process currently, every year I host a FinTech Flyover event at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. This year we had 300 people here. We had Andy Barr, a vice chair, or subcommittee chairman, financial institutions. We had Patrick McHenry, the chairman of financial services, and 300 people, including about 50 students, business students, that are sitting in the audience getting a chance to hear from major players in the space. Would strongly encourage you to consider coming next year. It's a great opportunity. We put business leaders, we put folks that are lawmakers, we put regulators in the same room. And I think now, because my party is going to be running the executive branch, I hope to have some of the top regulators in the country at our Flyover FinTech event. And one thing I tell people all the time, the best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. If you type in Mike Flood Congress, you'll find me in there. I put all my information about Flyover FinTech. I try to keep the political drivel to a minimum on there. I'm sure there's a few things, Wiley, you wouldn't like as much, but by and large, I use it as a way to communicate where I'm at on digital assets and FinTech and housing and insurance.
So you are all invited. And Representative Nickel, tell us about the bold letter that you wrote to the Harris campaign, to the DNC, asking them to include digital assets as part of the platform. How did that go over?
Yeah, no, I mean, we really pushed, you know, when it was clear that Biden wasn't going to be the nominee anymore and we had Harris, we really wanted to get a pivot, you know, from Harris and get her campaign moving in a different direction. You know, so we tried to organize. We got a number of Democrats on board to push the Harris campaign to embrace digital innovation. You know, they asked me for names of folks in industry to meet with. That really hadn't happened with the Biden administration. So they engaged for the first time. They did some good meetings. We pushed them to put out some statements that were positive, but in all, it was really just too little, too late. They didn't embrace digital innovation. They, you know, you had the Trump campaign with a full-throated embrace, really pushing specific policy positions that mattered for the 20% of registered voters, you know, who own crypto in the U.S. I mean, it's a huge growing segment. And so, you know, that was a place where we really worked hard. We made some progress with the Harris campaign, but I think for anybody who was watching the space and what Harris did, it really was not enough. And I think it could have been a huge difference in this campaign. You know, if you look at the folks, you know, who are part of groups like Stand With Crypto, it's a huge number of folks, and it's just a small, you know, literally 115,000 voters in 3 states, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If they had voted for Harris instead of Trump, Harris would be the next president. So, you know, just these small margins, you know, you got to really focus, you know, on the pro-crypto voter, and I think that was one of my takeaways from this last election.
Absolutely. So we do have some pro-crypto people going into the next administration. President-elect Trump has announced nominees for the Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, SEC Chair, and the AI crypto czar, all of whom have made pro-crypto statements. What is your advice to them, and how do you think that the administration can work to provide regulatory clarity for digital assets?
Well, what I think is so interesting is that essentially Patrick McHenry and our now chair, French Hill, really had no help from the SEC, from any of the regulators, the CFTC, putting together Fit for the 21st Century. Now that we're going to be working with a friendly SEC, CFTC, everything, you're going to see kind of more of a collaborative approach that will, I think, benefit everybody. There's going to be things that we have to stand up and protect. For me, it's this idea that we're going to let banks into digital assets. I don't want a top-down federal government regulator that usurps the power of a state banking department. We have a diverse banking system in America by having federally chartered banks and state chartered banks, and I don't want that eviscerated, that only states like New York get to play in this. Every state should play in this, and that's a hill that I'm willing to stand on to make sure we protect it. But here's the good news. In the House side, you have French Hill, who's the chair. He was the chair of the Digital Asset Committee. He's committed to it. He's balanced. He has the ability as a longtime former banker of dealing with the American Bankers Association and those issues and the FDIC, and he has the ability to see the benefit of innovation. And he's very invested in innovation. And so we've got the right person leading the committee, and my only guess is, and he's said this publicly since Friday during his election for that chairmanship, he's going to make this a priority in the next Congress, in the next, first 100 days. And that's good. That means we have to get to work right away. You're going to want to be, if you want to influence a policy, you're going to have to play with the Senate, you're going to have to play with the House, and you're going to have to be knowing who to contact at the SEC. And, there's this digital asset czar. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. But to keep an eye on it, you're going to have to watch all three. It's not like most of it was just being done in the House before.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about what French Hill will do. I didn't want to say anything positive or negative one way or another to influence that race, but he was one of the members who's really good at building those relationships. And I think if you're looking at how Congress works, for me, it's really all about relationships. It's an in-person business, and French is somebody who, on the committee, I was on his digital assets subcommittee. Once a month, he'd have a dinner at his house with 2 Democrats and 1 Republican just to get to know each other. And we need so much more of that. That I think is so important as we push legislation. But I want to make that same point that I made earlier. As you're looking at the future of legislation in Congress, if we continue to build on the progress we made with Democrats, and again, I pushed and whipped and led that effort to get 71 Democrats for Fit 21. If we build on that and keep Democrats involved and work in a bipartisan way, the legislation that we move through this Congress will be lasting, and it won't be subject to flipping back and forth with a different administration. So that's my hope for this next Congress, that we continue to put it in that space. And for me, the work I did with Mike and French Hill and Patrick McHenry, that's why you come to Congress. You come to Congress to work, and make compromises and work together to push legislation through. And in this Congress, we're going to be one of the least productive ever in our nation's history. But Fit 21 is really a highlight of one of the bigger things that we did, one of the best things that wasn't a must-pass bill. So the debt ceiling, the budget, support for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. So that gives me a lot of hope that we certainly can do these bigger things. And I'm really hopeful that we'll continue to build on that progress for the next Congress.
And we need 60 votes in the Senate, and this is not going to be part of any reconciliation package. So getting to 60 votes in the Senate means this is going to be a bipartisan bill. There's no way around it. This isn't going to be something where there's this trifecta control of Congress, because when it goes over to the Senate, it dies unless it's bipartisan. And I think we on the Financial Services Committee understand that, and French Hill, as our leader, certainly knows how to navigate that. So we're in a very good place.
Now, drilling into the Financial Services Committee, do you think that the next bill will look like the Fit 21 bill, or do you think it's going to be a permutation of it? And what do you think will actually be able to be passed into law?
That is a great question. I think it's going to look different than it is right now. You bring these regulators in, and they're going to adopt a stance where they want to see something passed. They're going to have things they want that we haven't considered, and I think the devil's in the details there. The good thing is that Fit for the 21st Century was crafted by Patrick McHenry and French Hill and our committee, and wonderful staff members like Allison and others that did really the heavy lifting. But I think when you start involving the executive branch, it has pluses and minuses, obviously, and I think it's going to look different than it does right now. I'm going to be watching the state piece, because regulators tend to want to centralize control, And we have to keep our banking system diverse. And yes, we have to have a federal regulator role. What that is going to look like, I don't know. But the basic thing that we did with Fit for the 21st Century is we said, this is a security and this is a commodity. We don't have to build a house with all the bells and whistles. We just have to build a foundation. And one of my concerns is that if you try to build the whole house, you snuff out innovation. We need a good foundation to let America get into this and not suck the air out of the room on every single issue. And so that's what I'm going to be watching for.
I'm not sure what it'll look like, but there's a ton of stuff we can all agree on. We all understand there's clearly regulatory gaps between the CFTC, the SEC. That's going to be an important piece of this, and I think the work we've done is going to set the table for the good consumer protections we need, and a bill that will hopefully be a very lasting bill.
Well, in our last few minutes together, I really want to thank you for being champions for our industry, and ask you, what bit of advice do you have to our industry going into this next cycle for us to ensure that good legislation, a good foundation is laid?
Start with your congressman or congresswoman and meet them at their level. And remember, it's about bringing them on and inspiring them to be helpful. And you may find someone that represents you, or you may interact with a member of Congress that isn't on the Financial Services Committee. Tell them what it means to you, to the business, how it will create wealth in America and put us at the top of the food chain, in the digital asset world. And the more you can do that with members that aren't interacting with us every day, the more you help the process, the plan, and all of us. And I would start with Democrats and really work hard there. I agree 1,000%. They say it takes the Senate 6 months to sneeze. So this is going to start in the House, and building a big number of Democrats, on this legislation really matters. Educating folks, it's just an education issue. If you educate people on issues in Washington, they're going to be with you. And so it's with all the things folks have on their agenda, making it clear, why this is important for your business, why it's important for your state. And getting in there, at the staff level, at the member level, that's going to be really important. To put up a big number for House Democrats, along with Republicans who are pretty united on this, at least in the last Congress. And then again, to Mike's point, getting to 60 votes in the Senate, really important to focus on those pro-business Democrats who are going to be central to getting it done. But again, make your voice heard. That's how Washington works, and why this policy summit certainly a really important piece to getting good legislation through Congress.
Well, on behalf of the Blockchain Association and Hedera, I want to thank you for coming and talking to us, and thank you for your years of leadership on these issues and continued leadership on these issues. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.